We're here with Mr. Khoo Chey, who is the executive director of the Center for Livable Cities in Singapore. Singapore is one of the world leading countries in innovative urban design and the rollout of urban programs. Mr. Khoo, may you tell me about more of the Singaporean planning heritage?
Well, Singapore is unique in the sense it's both a city and a country. We're an island of just about 720 square kilometers. But yet, we have a population of 5.5 million. So it's a pretty high density country, one of the densest countries in the world. But it's not always been like that. 50 years ago, we were less than 2 million people, but we were really a basket case of urbanization. We had 1 million people living in slums, we had traffic congestion, we had floods, we had droughts, we had crime, we had disease, right? Any urban ill you can think of, you name it, we had it, right? 50 years, I think we have transformed into one of the more livable cities in the world. And I think the story of that transformation really boils down to a couple of very important factors. I think the first is really the integrated approach that we took to planning, to urban planning, and of course, good governance. We call it dynamic urban governance. We actually started on the path of developing well in urban planning with the help of the UNDP, United Nations Development Program. They sent a team of people to Singapore, and alongside local planners, in fact, they drew up the first concept plan, the strategic plan that basically laid out the structure for how Singapore would grow. In other words, assembling the land in the city center to build a new city, locating where the port was going to be, the airport, and new towns where people would live. So it was really a structured plan for Singapore, drawn up in 1971, but to this day, the way the city has been laid out really follows that structured plan that was drawn up in 1972. Of course, since then, we've developed it, we've done a lot of detailed urban designs, and it's a process that is now ongoing and built in Singapore. One of the things that we thought is very important is, when people talk about sustainable development, and I think it's a term that became fashionable probably, in the late 80s, 90s, but Singapore has really been in the business of sustainable development ever since, the beginning, because we are an island with no resources, and yet we have to develop in a way that is sustainable, because if we fail, that's it, that's the end of us. And so we're going to make sure we survive. It's an existential question, right? And so my center was actually set up about 8 years ago to really try and document the process and the principles that Singapore went through, in our sustainable urban development journey. And so the center, we do research, we develop case studies based on what we did by talking to the people who were actually involved in the process, whether it was urban planning or transport or water or environment. And then we kind of built on that knowledge with research into some of the more challenging questions that Singapore faced. And then we try and share that knowledge, particularly with our own leaders, urban leaders, planners and so on, but also with other city leaders who may be interested, in this whole issue of sustainable urban development. And we do so through capacity building programs. And I'm glad that this morning we signed an MOU with the UN Habitat to have one of these programs for Africa. And we are very excited to be working with the UN Habitat to roll out the first program, in the near future. And we also have a platform for sharing and exchanging knowledge among cities all over the world. We call that the World Cities Summit, which is held every 2 years in Singapore. And we have a Mayor's Forum that's held every year. And this is how the cities of the world get together and exchange and share best practices. And the best among them, we have an award called the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, which we award. And so far, that award has gone to cities like Bilbao in Spain, New York, Suzhou in China, and most recently, Medellin in Colombia. Yeah.
That's fantastic. when we consider implementing the new urban agenda, we know that the scale of change that we're asking for is quite large. How do we implement what's needed to make more sustainable urban development for everyone?
I think from the research that we have done in distilling the principles of what we did in Singapore, we came out with this simple idea that we call the livability framework. And that simple idea, the livability framework, is basically the idea that if you want to make a city livable, you want to achieve the outcomes of livability. In other words, quality of life, a competitive economy, and a sustainable environment. Now, trying to kind of make sure all these things are done in a balanced way, in other words, you don't want to have economic development and pollute the city or country, and you want to make sure that economic benefits accrue to everybody, there's not just to a few people, that there is equity. Trying to achieve the balance is one of the most difficult challenges in urbanization. And we think, from our own experience, trying to do that for Singapore, there are two key things, right? Integrated approach to planning and development, and dynamic urban governance. And we think these are the two key things that cities must have if they want to achieve sustainable urbanization. And I'm very glad that these are the principles really that have been adopted in the new urban agenda, right? I think in the new urban agenda, you see the word integrated planning, the phrase occurring many, many times, and governance, So in other words, you need to have a group of people who are professional planners, who are working on plans and are able to execute the plans, but equally you need the support of a good governance system in place, which means you need good political leaders who have the vision, who can guide the growth of the city. You need good institutions based on, for example, the rule of law. You need a system where the private sector and the community are working closely with the government to be able to deliver the outcomes of good urbanization. So I think these are the ingredients, these are the elements for successful urbanization. Yeah.
And successful urbanization will also require a lot of knowledge sharing and cooperation. How do you envision that happening in future?
As I said earlier, I think there are many ways where we can share knowledge. We created what we call knowledge platforms, right? And one of the most important ways of sharing knowledge is really through capacity building. So we have training programs for our own leaders, and we have training programs for international city leaders. I think by now we have trained at least a couple of hundred city leaders from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, some from Eastern Europe as well. We also have the platform of the World City Summit and other conferences and workshops. We have lots and lots of publications. The case study series we produce called the Urban System Studies documents the lessons that have been learned from what Singapore has been able to accomplish, whether it's in water management or environmental management and so on. We have about 15 of those, and they're all available online, so people can actually download them and look at them. We have a regular publication called the Urban Solutions, published twice a year. And it's called Solutions because it's very practically oriented. So the busy city mayor or the city planner can just read that and get some very good ideas what other cities are doing in terms of solving their problems. So it's urban solutions, right? So these are some of the ways in which I think knowledge can be spread. I think a wonderful event like what the Habitat is doing in terms of the Habitat Tree or the World Urban Forum, I think those are, again, occasions where practitioners, academics, business people all come together, to learn. And I think it's tremendous to see this happening right here, in Quito, in Ecuador, as we are experiencing Habitat Tree. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.